The dark sky really, to me, just takes us back to a place where we can actually sit, look up, and just hear nature at night and see the sky and realize that that's one thing that the world hasn't changed for Indigenous people.
If you look on the map, the light pollution map, Maine has this black hole, and that's because we have an area that has little light pollution and we have very dark skies.
We need to connect people as a whole with the environment and to really understand that we don't own it, we don't control it, but we have a tremendous impact on it.
So anything that's evolved over millions of years to be nocturnal, lights will affect them.
If we preserve the sky, we're preserving the sky that our great-grandparents saw. And if we lose it, we're losing that sense of where we are.
I moved back home to Maine, the coast of Maine, in the early 2000s. And one night I got out of the car and looked up and was like, oh my gosh, the Milky Way. The stars were so bright and the sky was so black. It was an awe moment.
You know, our species has been in the dark at night forever until 100 years ago.
So I know when I look up at night and I'm in a dark area, that really brings out the stars and have an understanding of star stories that exist within our tribes. Really helps me to understand what my ancestors were probably thinking, because the dark sky really tells a story, and the stars are that story. And those stories really have a relationship to who we are as a people.
If we lose the night sky, we lose an elemental part of who we are. And we need to find ways to make sure we conserve that sky.
This area surrounding Katahdin has the largest areas of dark sky east of the Mississippi River. There's little light pollution and you can see the Milky Way and you can see stars here that you can't see on most of the East Coast.
I have paddled from Mount Katahdin, Ambejijis Lake, to North Haven Island 5 times. It's an enormous amount of river and ocean. And really part of that experience was, for me, to look at sort of these landmarks, these things that happened traditionally before contact period, so that I could observe or understand a little bit about what my ancestors might have gone through or seen, what's the same, what's different. One of the things that can't be changed yet, and that's great, is they haven't altered the sky. And business, industry, government has not altered what we see when we look up at night. What they have done, though, is made it a little harder for us to see that sky at night in certain areas.
So dark sky preservation, which sounds like it's about bringing the stars back, which it does, is really about a much bigger issue. So here's the thing. If you can't see the stars, which by the way is true for 80% of the world's population, that's the symptom of the problem. But that's indicative of the fact that there's too much artificial light being produced and being sprayed out in places where it's not needed. So what are the impacts of that? Well, yes, we lose the stars, but that's our symptom. The real problems cover many different areas. So let me hit a few of those pretty quickly here. One is, if you live in a light polluted area, you are at increased risk of breast or prostate cancer because it affects your body chemistry. It has been tied to other forms of hormonal cancers. It's been tied to problems with adolescent development because it affects sleep cycles. So it has just direct medical effects on people. Excessive light produces glare. So a lot of road lights, which aren't done well, produce glare. A lot of lights on parking lots produce a lot of glare. Gas stations are famous for being grossly overlit. All of these are creating glare and actually making it more dangerous to be on the road. So those are just a couple of things that affect humans. Birds and insects, pollination, which we desperately need. It's not just for pretty flowers and trees, but your food has to be pollinated. Some insect or bird has to bring the right stuff from one plant to another plant. That can be lowered by as much as 60% in areas that are light polluted.
So moths are pollinators. A lot of times people think of moths just the caterpillars that might do damage to a crop. But really, as we start studying more about moths, we're realizing that we've really studied those diurnal creatures, those daytime creatures like the bees and the butterflies. We haven't really touched moths, so they just started really studying them, and what they're noticing is that moths are incredibly important pollinators. Unlike a bee, where bees can be very specific to a plant, or they find a food source and they're like, gonna stay with that food source. Moths are not like that. They're actually very generalist, and so they'll go from plant to plant. And that kind of spreading of pollen across an ecosystem is incredibly important.